Welcome to the Sacred Stream radio podcast. I'm Laura Chandler, and my guest today is author, yoga instructor, and meditation teacher, Oneika Mays. And we're talking about her new book, Sit With Me, a no BS journey to mindfulness and meditation. Welcome, Oneika.
I am so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's great to have you here. And I loved the book, and I'm excited to talk about it. And I'm going to give a very brief overview before we jump in. So the backdrop for the book is the story of the time that you spent volunteering and working at Rikers Island, a correctional facility in Manhattan. And overlaid throughout the book is the telling of your story, sharing your own lessons and transformative experiences, framed by the practice of metta or loving kindness, which you offer teachings on throughout the book. Is that fair?
Yeah, that is. That's you summed it up perfectly.
Okay.
I'm going to have to remember that and say it exactly like that.
Great. Great. Well, just to get us started, I'm curious what brought you to yoga and mindfulness, and then later what brought you to want to bring that to Rikers Island.
I found yoga through a colleague, coworker of mine when I was working at a bookstore, and she was an Ashtangi and I was stressed out, and she mentioned that I might enjoy yoga. And so, I'm going to be dating myself here, but I got a VHS tape with Rodney Yee, and I felt really moved, but I still wasn't ready to embrace the practice. I think I was so moved, but not quite ready to sit with myself yet. So I didn't embrace it. And then when I had a personal tragedy happen in my life, I found myself called back to yoga. And I think that's the wonderful thing about any contemplative practice. Like once you wake up and it discovers you, it never goes away. Even if you wander away, it's always there.
Yeah.
And so when life felt really upended and I made a series of bad decisions because I was grieving, I found myself back on a yoga mat. And that's when life changed for me. And I was ready for the practice at that point. And I felt so held by the practice. I felt so comfortable with myself that it felt like a blessing. And I wanted to return that. And that's how I ended up first volunteering at Rikers. And then I worked there full time for almost 5 years.
Wow. Wow. Well, it's difficult to develop to maintain a practice like loving kindness or any practice in such a difficult environment. And you talk about that in the book. And I'm just wondering how did you cultivate it there?
There were, I think having like a grounded practice in metta felt really powerful before I was teaching at Rikers. And I was practicing metta before I began teaching it there.
Hmm.
And what's interesting is that when I first thought about teaching metta inside, I wasn't sure that it would be received well. I thought that, oh, I don't want to teach, because when we're talking about metta, for folks who are listening who may not know what it is, it's this unconditional friendliness and it starts with yourself and it expands outward. And you first include a loved one and then a neutral person that's also called a familiar stranger and then a difficult person. And I found the difficult person, I thought people might not want to deal with the difficult person because of the circumstances of being in jail. And then I realized that that was me holding back. And I had no business holding back and making decisions for people about the practice. So that was metta showing up right there. And then I decided to just go for it. And if people didn't like it, they wouldn't practice it, but that had nothing to do with me. And that's how I started teaching. And then the practice held me because I worked with a lot of people I didn't like, but
Hmm.
that didn't mean that I didn't have to love them. I even sat with people at Rikers that I didn't like, but that didn't mean didn't have to, I couldn't love them unconditionally.
Right, right. And I mean, you know, you have to go really, really deep to get there. And just adding also to your, you know, kind of description of metta and practicing unconditional friendliness. This is from like the teachings of the four immeasurables,
Hmm.
right? The loving kindness meditation, which is really I'm a little lean in the study a lot with Tibetan Buddhism, and every Tibetan practices this. This is the like wake up in the morning, this is what you do.
Yes.
And it is such a powerful um tool. It's such a
Mm.
powerful tool. And I'm just so it's so moving to just to know that you brought it somewhere where it could do so much benefit
Yeah.
and also benefited you. It, but the benefit that it brought to people, what did how was that for you? What how did people receive it?
It was received lots of different ways, to be
Yeah.
honest with you, and
Mhm.
and I think, I love that you mentioned the 4 measurables because the Brahma-Viharas, these 4 divine principles that we live by, loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity, I embodied, and when I was introduced to the 4 Brahma-Viharas, I felt like it was coming home because those principles together really grounded me, and they helped me to sustain myself in a place like that. And when I taught them to other people, some people loved it. Some people could really connect with it. Some people didn't, which is fine too. But I think because I could embody it, it wasn't even so much what other people received. I think it was also just me living that example, which I think is such an important part of the practice. One thing I recognized early on working there full time, because I think there was a big transition for me volunteering, going in a couple times a week versus being there every single day, 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, and really understanding that I had to let go of outcome. I had to let go of this idea, like, I hope this people get something from it, because I think if I did that, I might be layering on another form of judgment,
Mhm.
and grasping too much on what I hope people would get from it. And I think part of me just has to hope or dream that the work rippled out,
Yeah.
and that's kind of the best that I could do. There was one person in particular who I talk about in the book. Her name is Tabby. She loved metta instantly. Like it really resonated with her, and that was lovely, and I didn't wanna hold on to that too tightly either, but it was beautiful to witness, and
Yeah.
it was beautiful to witness in myself when there were really challenging things going on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the big teaching, right? Like the non-attachment, but like, again, words easy to say, not so easy to do, right? And, and I find with people like yourself, um, people who are really here to do good work, who are here to help others, who are, socially minded. Um, that's the big challenge is not being attached, and wanting to do more. And, I'll just share like what I've found in my life on many levels is that I can't always know. In
Mm,
fact, I'll rarely know. You know, I might have some idea, and I can sit back and go, "Oh, wow, yeah, that I did a lot there." But the reality is you don't get to know
yeah.
always. And so then you have to trust. And then, and you grapple with this in your book. You talk about this in your book. It's like it being enough, like it being okay. And
Mhm.
you get to the place you also talk about in your book. You know, at least I glean this, that it's important, like, just what we do for ourselves, if we can, if we can work on ourselves and be that change within ourselves, we're doing something really important.
We really are. And I always say this, it sounds corny to start with yourself, but it's really the only thing you can do. Start with yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, and if you do nothing else, if you're just being a decent human being,
Yes.
you know, yeah, it's so important. I mean, you've just changed the world. You've just
Right.
used the world a little bit. Like if we all did it, we wouldn't have the mess we've got. Yeah.
We wouldn't exactly, we wouldn't have the mess if everybody, just for even 20 seconds a day,
Yeah.
sat down and said, "Okay, I'm gonna love myself a little bit more today."
Yeah.
The world would probably look very different.
Yeah.
And yet, I know that big change comes when a group of people focus on that. So it's my hope that more and more people, and it seems like more and more people are starting to wake up to this idea of, spirituality and change. And it starts with me. And if I can do something with myself, that can ripple out into the world. And I have hope with that. I really do. I feel like I'm seeing a lot more hopefulness in these times, because I think times like this are an unveiling, right? And we start to see the power of community. We start to see the power of what happens when enough of us say, like, enough of this.
Yeah.
And we are committed to change, even if it means that we're starting with ourselves.
Yeah. And, and even beyond, and you talk about this, even beyond just loving ourselves. And there's a whole thing about that. And maybe we'll get into this like self-loathing and like, how a lot our culture, we have that. Other cultures don't necessarily, I'll just tell you this briefly because I thought I just wanted to share this with you. But I have a friend who Thupten Jinpa, who's the Dalai Lama's principal interpreter, and he does a whole bunch of other things. Um, but he started the Compassion Institute at Stanford University where they teach this. He, in teaching these training people to work with other people with compassion doing this training, he said it was so difficult to get people, and these are people who are practiced, Buddhist practitioners, meditators, mindfulness practitioners, to be able to have that loving kindness for themselves in that meditation. So he actually switched it to start with someone that you love and then bring that to yourself, and I thought, wow, that's really amazing, you know. And then there's always the story too of the Dalai Lama not understanding self-loathing and having to explain it to him. And he's like, it's impossible to loathe self, And every Tibetan monk that I ever have met has not been able to understand it. And you're like, it's a real problem here, But anyway, I digress a bit. But it is important, in understanding the psyche of contemporary culture, and then, this group of people who are so marginalized here at Rikers, and I wanted to talk to you about that because you reflect on your own experience of marginalization as a queer woman, as
Mhm.
a person of color,
Mhm.
and then also seeing this really extremely marginalized community. And I'm just wondering how those experiences shaped the way you connected with people you met at Rikers.
That's such a beautiful question, and I haven't been asked that yet, and I'm so grateful, because I think as a woman who's Black and queer, and I grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood for my entire life, so I think holding on to that, left me feeling on the outsides and on the margins a bit, partially from my own doing. It wasn't just society, and I think that's important to note that, you know, you swallow some things and then you embody them. And whether it was internalized homophobia, internalized racism that I had, that I was protecting myself. So I was stopping myself from getting hurt before it actually even happened. And then when I started, I did a lot of therapy. I did therapy for a very long time. But the practice of metta is what cracked that open for me. And I think it was because of that I could unhook a little bit, and I could appreciate my identity, but not necessarily connect with the oppression from it. And that I separated from that. So when I walked into a place like Rikers, I could feel free enough inside myself to feel safe inside my body, that I didn't feel triggered being in that environment, and yet still be able to connect with people who, a lot of people there were Black and brown, but then also that marginalization of being incarcerated on top of it. I I think I say this in the book, like, when I walked inside Rikers for the first time, I felt comfortable. I felt like, "Oh, I belong here," and not so much because I felt like I believed that I needed to be incarcerated, but I understood what it meant to feel trapped. Um, Not to minimize the experience of incarceration at all, but that feeling of being trapped, I related to. And someone asked me, and I don't write about this in the book, but I've written an essay about this. That one of the first times when I was volunteering, somebody asked me if I ever did time, and I was like, "Oh, no, I haven't." And then everybody was like, "Oh, you're not supposed to ask somebody that." But did you? And because she was like, "You're so comfortable. You're so comfortable with us. You're so comfortable here that we just assume that you've done time." And it was the first time I was able to say, like, I think I trapped myself a lot of ways, and maybe that's what you're sensing. And it was a really interesting moment because I felt a sense of shame for a second that I even had to contend with, thinking, oh, people thought I've done time before and the judgment that comes along with that. So I had to like navigate that, and then felt seen at the same time too. Like, oh, you see me, you see the work that I've done. So it was really, it was really powerful.
Yeah, it's such a testament to the work that you've done. And, I mean, really like to be comfortable in yourself and to be able to hold space in any situation. But I wanna stay here for a minute. There's this quote, and I have a few quotes from the book, but there's a quote that says, "I felt that my commitment to my community and to the end of white supremacy meant staying close to my anger and resentment. I stuck with the practice anyway because there was a quieter, wiser part of me that cut through my fear and got me on track." And this is us talking about the work that you did, and you share a lot
Mhm.
of the work that you did
Mhm.
personally in the book.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna say anything more about that.
Yeah. When I first encountered the difficult person, and I thought instantly, well, how am I going to send love to racist people? Like, that's just not going to happen. And then I had to understand that if I didn't free myself from that, I'd be walking around with that hate forever. But what scared me more was I realized I had identified so much with the idea of pushing back against white supremacy. And I was identifying and grasping onto that. Like, this is who I am. I push back against this. And it was closing my heart off. And it was scary to think about, well, who will I be if I let that go?
Mm.
And that was such a big part of my journey. I was afraid of empty space. I was afraid of who am I if I'm not hating something or someone else. And that's what terrified me. That, well, if I can't identify with being a social justice person and fighting back against something, then who am I going to be? And that's when Metta dropped in. It's like, well, you're going to love yourself. That's who you're going to be. You're going to be somebody who's in love with yourself, and you don't have to be attached to that.
Yeah.
And that was a big aha moment for me. It was really freeing and liberating in a way that I had never felt before. And it was scary to feel that free because I'm
Yeah.
like, "Oh, this is what freedom is." And what do I do with that?
That is so point you're just so on point there. It's such an important, it's so important. I just think of all my so many activists that I've known, myself being a social justice activist from way back that, you think, how is this still happening again? But, that idea of identifying with your anger and then drawing power from it, right? Like to fight the fight. And, I see so many, I'm just gonna say it, like some activists who like, if they're not fighting this one thing, then they're fighting amongst themselves. I'm like,
Right.
like
Right.
they keep the big picture, there's a bigger picture. And, and you just described the way through. Like you
Yeah.
described the way through. Like if everyone could hold that and then fight the good fight,
Right.
what a different world. What a different world.
I think there's this sense with activists that you want to fight the same way that you're being fought. But then I think about that incredible quote from Audre Lorde that we hear so much, that the master's tools will not bring down the master's house. And so you can't use that. Like, you think it makes sense at the time, and because it feels full and it feels useful. And while the anger is useful, using that same technique will only burn you down inside.
Yeah.
And it took me a long time. I mean, I'm saying this really easily,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it's decades of of really peeling back, and it still rises up. I see what's happening in the world, and I feel that anger that doesn't feel useful, that's burning from a different place, and
Yeah.
having to have that unconditional friendlies come in and say, like, I get that you're feeling that, and here's why you're feeling it, and this is why that's not useful. So take the anger, because you can still use righteous anger as
Yeah.
a tool to dismantle and cause less harm in the world. But if you use it as just fire to burn everything down, you're going to burn yourself down in the process.
Exactly, exactly. And, I'm just thinking of like, that beautiful aspect of parts of the civil rights movement with John Lewis, who's like
Ah,
my big hero, and of course Martin Luther King, and like walking what we're talking about is they were embodied,
mhm.
and I always think of that. I think it was John Lewis. It might have been Shirley Chisholm. I may, but I'm gonna attribute it to John Lewis that like if there's not a seat at the table for me, I'm gonna make a seat at the table. It's
Yeah.
not like I'm gonna burn it down.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm
I
just
think it was
give it to
Fannie Lou Hamer, but
okay.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. But yes, you have to. I was really fortunate. I think it was in 2017 and 2018. I went on 2 civil rights tours with, a group of people, and among them was Bernard Lafayette, who just recently transitioned, and he
Yeah.
was our guide.
Oh god.
And I to
Wow.
spend to spend 3 days with Bernard Lafayette just talking about the Freedom Riders and just the love that they had to embody. And Charles Alphen Jr. was also another person who was on the tour, and they were just talking about the power of nonviolence. That didn't mean right, it didn't mean not being angry. You could still be angry, but love had to be the overpowering tool to feel full, and it felt so affirming because I grappled. My grandfather was an activist. He was a civil rights organizer. He was a union organizer. He was a member of the Communist Party and of the Black Panther Party. So, like, anger was something I knew. Like,
Yeah.
anger was something that was deeply ingrained. And so, to even talk about love felt like a betrayal, to be honest with you, because it felt like weakness. But then hearing Bernard Lafayette talk about the power of love and how it kept them going, and how love needed to be this overarching principle that you were like really in relationship with, felt like I was like, no, I am on the right track. Like, I am doing the right thing. And we don't talk about it enough, because I think here, um, in the West and in the United States, it's something that's seen as weakness. It's something is seen that can hurt you rather than something that can be empowering, even if we are brokenhearted.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're right, exactly. It's sort of the dominance culture, which we often call the patriarchy or whatever, but just any
Yeah.
culture that's dominant, the way we, go to war and, swagger around,
Mhm.
that dominance mentality is in and of itself weak. And you just see at the heart of those people their weakness. And when you're talking about loving kindness and when we're talking about, nonviolent, activism in its most powerful form, one of those tools is the ability to be vulnerable,
Mm.
which becomes it's like a superpower, like to be
Yeah.
comfortable with your vulnerability. And I think, yeah, I don't know if you addressed it directly, but indirectly for sure, you did. I mean, you were talking about like I had to go deep, I had to look at the
Mm.
stuff I didn't want to look at.
Yeah.
And that is the way. Like, yeah, however you get there, I don't care what you do to get there, whatever your practice is, like that's it.
Yeah.
Embracing vulnerability um makes you real strong.
It does. It makes you strong. And being vulnerable at a place like Rikers was a a practice I had to keep reminding myself of over and over and over again. And it's such a balance between staying vulnerable and staying open. And then also there's a numbing out that has to happen in order for you to cope with being in there every day. And I think that was the difference too. When you're a volunteer, I could go in and be vulnerable because I'm there a couple times a week. But I saw this shift when I was there every single day. And, I used to work with people one on one mostly. I would teach a couple of group classes, but I would see sometimes up to 10 people a day, 5 days a week. And so to sit and be vulnerable and to hear people's stories and to hold that and then to sit with them or do whatever our practice was, it became a lot because I heard a lot of tragedy, a lot of things that never should have happened to
Yeah.
people, like things that I couldn't even imagine. And yet, if I didn't maintain that vulnerability, people wouldn't want to share and wouldn't be able to have this opportunity to sit with themselves because it wasn't about me. It was about people being able to sit with themselves
Mhm.
in a space for just a moment, even if it were just 5 minutes to be able to do that. And it became such a delicate balance and such a walk that ultimately became too challenging for me to do because those environments aren't meant for people. They aren't. And so to think that you could do that long term and be like that, it was virtually impossible.
Well, yeah, you did it well for a long time, like 10
Yeah.
years, right?
Yeah, well, volunteered for 6 and then worked there for yeah, full time. So it was a lot, and I was able to do it for a while. I think it's working there full time is what took me under, truthfully. It was being there day in and day out because you can't help but get institutionalized. You have to in order to cope. You have to learn how to numb out. You end up getting, a really dark sense of humor to deal with things that gets you through the day, but you can't live life that way, but
Yeah.
you have to live life like that. You have to find a way to almost learn how people have this term called learning how to jail.
Mm,
And because you have to learn how to be there. It's a it's a lifestyle, it's an environment. You can't necessarily just be yourself and be there or you won't survive. And that happens for people who are incarcerated. It also happens for staff. It also happens for officers. You have to learn how to be there. And the fact that you have to learn how to do something like that is a real sign that an environment like that shouldn't exist if you have to learn how to do it.
yeah. Like exactly, and you talk a lot about that in the book and, you're kinda coming to the decision to not stay there and how you grappled with that. And you also talk about grappling with, being part of the problem, like, are you contributing by being there, which I think you were. I think it was a blessing, I think it was a spark of light every day that you were there, but, uh, so I'm wondering how you're doing now. Like, how do you reflect back on your time?
Yeah. It's 2026 now. I left there in 2023. And I think it took me almost 2 full years to unpack
Mhm.
the experience. Writing the book was yet another, I think, catharsis for me and being able to relive and reflect on what happened. For I would say for the first year after I left, I was still my nervous system was still really dysregulated and I thought it wasn't, but there would be moments. There was an apartment building. I was living in Brooklyn at the time that had a fire alarm that sounded exactly like the alarm at Rikers when there was an alarm that would go off. And I remember being in the park one day by my place and that alarm went off and I jerked and I realized, "Oh, you're still there. Like,
Mhm.
you're still inside."
Yeah.
And that was a wake-up call for me, recognizing that if I feel like that and I wasn't even incarcerated, what is the long-term impact on people who are incarcerated? And that stays with me.
Yeah.
And it really stays with me because people had trauma, and then jail is another traumatic experience on top of that, and then you either get released or get sentenced and still having to unpack the trauma of being there. So it took a while. And I think it's out of me now, but the experience will never leave me. And I don't want it to
Yeah.
because I think it will always keep me connected, tethered in a way, through love to people everywhere who are incarcerated and not just inside jails or prisons, but in other ways who are still impacted by the justice system.
It's so complicated. It's so complicated, and you're just describing, like, the micro traumas,
Mhm.
constant micro traumas that you
Mhm.
experience just going in there and that the people there are experiencing constant every day and night, 24
Yeah,
hours a day.
24 hours a day.
And how do how does anyone survive that? Like come out able to function,
Mhm.
fully, you know?
Yeah. I'm a believer that I believe that services need to be given to people. There's a lot of reentry that happens, but I think a part of what we owe people in order to continue to facilitate healing is healing practices that people can engage in post incarceration. Um, Regardless, because people at Rikers are accused of something. Most of them are awaiting trial, so they haven't even been convicted of anything.
Yeah,
And so we're placing this trauma on top of people. And there are people who serve sentences or a year or less who stay at Rikers. But it is really harsh on the system,
yeah,
especially if you're somebody who lives in a dorm area where the lights aren't off.
yeah,
Um, at, ever and what that does to your body physiologically just as it relates to sleep is I think criminal, frankly.
yeah. Absolutely. And it comes back to that idea of dominance culture and
Hmm.
dominant culture that you know, they need to be punished, like
Right.
as if, you know, being locked up isn't a punishment. So
Hmm.
then it's okay to make it harsher.
Yep.
And you talk in the book about the effect on the guards
Hmm.
and then that complex relationship even for you with the guards.
Yeah, it was really something because I will say, as embarrassing it is to admit, when I first started volunteering, I had this view. Everybody who was incarcerated was there on some miscarriage of justice, and every officer was a terrible person. That was my view. Except for me, I was the only wonderful person because I was there to go teach trauma informed yoga and mindfulness. I was the only one doing anything good. It was terrible. And life is so much more complicated than that. There were people who I met who were incarcerated who I didn't like at all, and who weren't great people. And then there were officers who were amazing people. I'll never forget when I was volunteering, I was on an elevator, and I don't write about this in the book, or and there was somebody who used to operate the elevator, and she was reading Buddhist boot camp.
Ah,
And I was like, "What is happening? This is amazing." And I was like, "Get out. Are you reading that?" She was like, "You're not the only one who's into spirituality." Lawrence. It
that
was so great. It was
yeah,
fabulous. And when I started working there full time and I saw her when I was walking in one morning, she was so excited. She was so happy I was there full time. And so she cracked me open quite a bit and allowed me to be open to realize that
yeah,
plenty of officers were people who cared and who wanted a job. And there were officers who weren't great. And that's just people.
yeah.
And it was um it was a great experience for me to remember that I needed to let go of judgment, which is a lifelong lesson for me.
Well, what an ally to have, to discover there. It makes me think of I'm just gonna share this with you. When I first we started the Sacred Stream Center and the teachings that we do here, one of our students, was a warden at a prison in Massachusetts, and we were so excited, like, we can bring tools, and he wanted to bring tools, but, it's like, we could do this. But who was president in the early 2000s, he's like, "There's nothing. There is absolutely nothing. They won't let anything in." But one of the conversations that I had with him, he was a warden, he had been a Marine, and he said, "Laura, there's no difference between us and them. I could just as easily be behind those walls." He got it. He got it. It's just easily the roles could be reversed. So nice to have him as a warden, I imagine, but the system is utterly broken, and, it's people like you who are contributing to fixing it. I mean, I don't know how we utterly fix it, but I think it does come back to a larger shift in consciousness. culturally and just
Mhm.
on the planet, you know? It's
Yeah, I
so
think so. I think when people realize that people in jails and prisons are not over there, but they're here with us, that we start to treat each other differently. And I think there's such a need to label things good and bad. And so if I'm good, somebody else has to be bad,
Mhm.
rather than sort of moving with this idea that if people cause harm, can we restore the people who've been harmed, and can we restore folks who have caused harm, rather than that label of good and bad, which is such a binary. And I that warden sounds just amazing, because there were so many officers who I worked with who wanted mindfulness as well, who wanted yoga, and who would even come sit sometimes and
Yeah.
just pop in, because everybody needs relief, and systems like that I think are working as they've been designed. And so we need to like figure out a new way to do this, right?
Yeah.
A new way. And with people like that warden, change, I think, is possible. I think
Mhm.
it is possible. I think it starts with us, and we start to demand better. And, I was talking to someone, a lot of people ask me, like, what was it like working with folks? But I think we're all capable of doing something. And you don't know what you're capable of until you're in a certain situation, and you just hope that people will be around to support you and help you heal from something.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I'm reminded of a joke, someone told me once. It's like, uh, when the going gets tough, it's every bodhisattva for themselves. Oh, yeah. So, it's like it points to so much, right? It points to so much privilege, points
Yeah.
to when we're talking about marginalized communities, certainly uh, black and brown populations are way overrepresented in those situations. But, you know, the white people there are also
Yep.
did not have a good start.
Yep.
Many, and it's like it's just the inequality and the injustice there. So, yeah, back to your point that, we're all capable of, and that's why a contemplative practice, a practice like metta is so helpful and so important because it gives us the opportunity to you talk about this, to pause and to really cultivate something within us that can offer support and sustenance. And, it takes work. And, maybe you want to say something about that work, but I will, I'm going to read, there's another quote where you talk about that. The tiny space between what triggers you and how you respond becomes precious. Each time you stop to check in, you're learning to spot patterns that have been running on autopilot for years. And so this is, and I'll read one more quote because it ties in. I eventually learned that true yoga happens not when I feel good, but when I face what what feels uncomfortable. And that's that's the work,
Yeah.
right? So
That's it. That's what Rikers really allowed me to embrace. And it helped me live when I wasn't there, I think, more fully. There was no place like Rikers to put my practice into action.
yeah,
It was really one thing
yeah,
walking around saying like, "Oh, I practice metta." It's another thing when I did it inside, and also just found myself confronted with so many judgments about people, especially, I mean, there were so many staff members and officers who I didn't agree with and didn't like me. It's not like this was just me one way. You know, I know they probably thought like, oh, here's the hippie yoga meditation person doing her mindfulness thing. And A lot of people thought that people at Rikers should be punished and had real different views than I did
Mhm.
about the work that I was doing. And I learned to not just work with them, but to be in relationship with them.
Yeah.
And that's when I started to notice when I felt triggered and be like, why do you really not like this person? What is it truly about? Are you seeing something in yourself in this person? Which is usually what it is. Let me be honest about what's happening. But something usually tweaks me and I'm like, oh, that's because I do that. And so I saw that I like every day. Every
Yeah.
day I was confronted with that. So it was really beautiful. Like it was beautiful practice. It was hard, but it was beautiful practice.
Yeah. Yeah. And, back to that space, the space between, the tiny space in between, what you're talking about and you offer these practices and, ways of practicing in the book for people, who, I encourage to go out and buy the book and read the book and, um, gain some more opportunity to learn and work with meta. Um, that those spaces is where the work happen,
Yes.
and so here you and I are, having a fun conversation, and, like, which I love, and we're putting words to things, and, like, I think I know what you're talking about, and I think you know what I think you but at the same time, when we go in to those spaces and we create those spaces and that stuff comes out,
Hmm.
that's when we are doing the work. We're on our own. Well, we have support. We have a larger support. But and I just want to encourage people, and I think your book does that, that it's gonna be okay. Yep. It's like we have all these distractions that keep us from going in. And then when we get in, it's like, I don't know about that. Oh, I don't want to feel bad. I thought this was supposed to make me feel good. Sometimes it's hard,
Yeah.
but that's okay. When you sit with that, you move through it. And it's like you said earlier, it's liberation. It's truly liberating.
It really is. And, you know, I think a lot of folk when they first encounter metta, it seems like a throwaway practice because, of course, I want to offer love to everyone, but it's not about the offering of the love. It's about what gets in the way of you offering the love. That is the real practice. And I wanted to be able to write about that and make that clear because that is that's the real juicy part about the practice. It's not the offering of the phrases. We can all do that. It's when I'm like, yeah, I even love this person. I don't feel like offering the phrases right now. That's when it's time to examine. And that's what I found so empowering. I was like, look at all of these gaps. Look at all the people I am not interested in loving right now. That's we need to look at that, Onika. That's a thing to examine.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And it's okay not to be perfect.
Yeah.
It's okay. Like, newsflash, we're human and humans are not great. Like we think we think we're gonna arrive, but like here's the punchline, you never arrive, you're always working. But but that's also the gift, like
Yes.
that's the task. And then to find joy within it, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's so true. Being a person is really hard.
It's
And
work.
it's so hard.
Yeah.
And I think if you have you have to just as you said, find some joy in doing it
Yeah.
because, why make it harder? It's already really hard. You
Yeah.
don't need to make it more difficult.
Yeah. And I love talking to you. I'm gonna keep talking to you for a few more minutes if that's okay, if I can steal your
Yes.
time here. But like that's what you get to, with being authentic. Like when we're really talking, like you talk a lot in the book about being comfortable in your own skin. Where you're not, what we're talking about here is like we're not putting on masks.
Mhm.
We're not like we're just reaching the place within ourselves where we're just really authentic with ourselves,
Yeah.
right? And you talk about spiritual bypass. You have a section on
Yep.
that, and that's what we're talking about. It's like I see people going meta, 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 meta. namaste. I was like,
Right.
and I had a teacher once tell me, this older Tibetan monk, he said, he was giving a teaching and he said, "Shin, don't just say compassion." He was really like, to the group.
Ah,
He's like, feel it. You have to feel it when you say it. You can't just say it. Have to feel it when you say it. And that is that is big. It
It
sounds so easy, but it's
it sounds so easy.
yeah.
It sounds so easy until you're really confronted with something when you don't want to give it. And
Yeah.
that's the real thing. Noticing when you don't want to give it is the time to pause and say why.
Yeah. That's right. That's right. And that's when you get to dig in and be on the path to liberation.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you're gonna have moments of feeling that. And, and there's always gonna be joy and not and struggle along the way. Just embrace it.
Yep.
Sorry, I made that sound simple. But you know what I'm saying. It's like I think it's where accept it. It's like when we accept the reality. Robert Thurman always says, Buddhism is realism,
Oh,
right? It's realism. And so we're really getting, when we're getting real, when we're getting honest, it's like, yeah, some shit's ugly here,
yeah.
that's it going on. But, and there's some amazing things going on. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, Onika, it's just such a joy to meet you and so much fun to talk. And I hope to stay in touch and I hope to have you back and
Oh,
just wish you all the best with the book. It's really it's a great read. I say that with all sincerity. It's just I couldn't put it down. So
oh, thank you so much. And this was a joy. Like I knew I was gonna really enjoy this conversation, frankly, but it was really a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
anytime.